So we started with runtime environment. Um, so we have said that compiler needs runtime support. There are lots of reasons for doing that. The memory management thing, then how to how to release and request and release memory blocks, other resources like printers, file systems. Here we are mainly focusing on memory management. So by memory management, we essentially mean stack, heap, and garbage collection. I actually gave one assignment to one group, a little challenging one, where you will be actually required to manage your own heap. So that's very interesting work, not very difficult, but slightly challenging. And as I said, this heap has nothing to do with the heap data structure. It's just that this segment is called a heap segment. The stack segment is called a stack segment, and it is actually a stack data structure. But heap segment is not really a heap data structure. It's just a concept where you can actually um, get your memory allocated and deallocated in the runtime. That's what it means. In fact, very often this heap may be organized as a queue kind of thing, a buffer kind of thing, which is nothing but a queue, maybe a two-dimensional linked list or something like that. I'm sorry, a two-way linked list or something like that. But doesn't mean that it has to be a heap. Although heap is nothing but a form of queue. So if you think that way, it has some analogy. And of course, there is garbage collection. So we have seen how the storage is organized: code, static, heap, stack, and how they actually grow to each other, and what is there in code and data memory. We have static and dynamic allocation strategies. We already know that dynamic allocation always happens from the heap, and static allocation happens from the data area or static area. Okay. So anything which is declared with the static area is actually a compile time allocation, which is very interesting. So that part, like whatever you declared as static variable in C, is actually allocated storage space in compile time, versus something which you create which you allocate in, say, a function, that is always allocated in runtime on the stack. And as I said, stacks are needed for procedure calls because you can always have nested procedure calls. We are going to uh, enhance on this idea to quite some extent today. Then we have parameter passing methods: call by value, uh, call by reference, and call by value result. Please look at this carefully because you might be getting questions in internal as well as in semester on these issues. And there is a call by name method as well. Then we went to the quick short program: read array, partition, quick short, main. And there we have seen the activation sequences, and then we have the activation tree. So this is how the activation tree is formed when you actually look into the execution of quicksort program with some parameter values. Here it is q1, 9. So you can see how the partition procedures are called with the parameters, and then how they are dividing the array into subarrays and stuff like that. Control stack, we have already seen, it plays a very important role in keeping track of the function context. Now, these are the questions which we are trying to answer here. Can we have recursive procedures? What happens to the values of local names? Can a procedure refer non-local names? We'll see examples of that here. It's not possible in C, but certainly possible in other languages. That's why I gave some assignments where you can explore that feature, how to do it. So that is basically when the activation of a particular variable outlives its context. So you declare a variable within a function, and even after the function returns, that variable will be available. That kind of storage mechanism has to be placed, and we'll see how it is done in real life. Parameter passing mechanisms, things like that. So activation record plays a very important role, a central role. And as I said, activation records can be organized in many different ways. It could be stack based, it could be heap based, it could be statically allocated. Generally, these are managed by the runtime stack known as control stack. Each live activation has an activation record. I think all of you understand what is meant by a live activation. Basically, you are calling a procedure and the control is within that procedure. That means that that particular part of the program, that particular function is live, is active. And then the concept of root and leaves. This is the general structure of an activation record: actual parameters, return values, control link, access link, saved machine status, local data, and temporaries. So we have seen these things as well. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about control link and access link because they play very important roles in procedures where you can have nested functions. We'll talk about that. Then we have the concept of static versus dynamic storage allocation. So static allocation is a compile time decision, whereas dynamic allocation is a runtime allocation. As I said, stack allocation, the interesting thing is that names local to a procedure are allocated space on the stack. Okay, so as soon as the context of the stack is removed, those variables no longer exist. But if you allocate something on heap, like for example, you might be having a pointer inside a function where you allocate memory inside the function, that pointer is very much available even after the function returns. Okay, you have already seen that. Like for example, when you created the header of the linked list or any of the nodes of the linked list, you returned from the allocation function or insertion function, but that pointer was very much live from anywhere of the on the anywhere in the program context because the allocation was on the stack. It has a bad side effect as well because unless you are very careful about releasing that memory, it will be there forever. In fact, in languages where garbage collectors are not very active, you end up leaking memory for the system. That means if your program is buggy and runs a lot of times using a lot of leaked memory or producing a lot of leaked memory, then in that case, your system might actually get stuck, crash, and things like that. So this is a fundamental problem with C, C++ kind of language, which can actually cause the machine to hang or machine to crash. Okay, which is a very costly proposition because some of these machines are required to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the year for years, maybe 10 years, 20 years. Okay, so they can't have a downtime even for a single minute in this 20 years time frame. So C and C++ has these problems, have these problems. Heap allocation used for data that may leave even after a procedure call returns. That means it is active even after its activation context is no longer there. And as I said, garbage collector has to be very good. Java has an excellent garbage collector, so this problem is not there in Java. So now, what is the specialty of static allocation? The static allocation, the biggest advantage is that names are bound to storage as the program is compiled. So there is no runtime support. So that means if you look at the memory layout, its position is fixed by the time your program is run. So it does not depend on runtime. So every time a procedure is activated, its names are bound to the same storage location. It might appear very funny to you because in C you will never have that kind of a scenario where you have kept a variable in a static area and then you terminate the program and you run it and you find the old value there. It's not going to happen, but because of many other reasons. But in many languages, that was required, that you have a static support. So that means, but at least in C, the values of local names are retained across activations of the procedure. So even though it's not across program invocations, but definitely within the same invocation of the program, for different calls to the same procedure, the static values are not altered. Means they are retained across activations, which is a good thing because we use static variables very often to share data between different procedures. Although this is not at all a recommended thing, from software engineering because it increases the coupling and That's probably something you can avoid. When control returns to a procedure, the values of the locals are the same as they were when control left the last time. Okay, so that means there is no change in the allocation of these variables. So how does the compiler determine the amount of storage? From the type of a name, because a type generally explicitly mentions how much storage is required. If you want to use static allocation, that has to be very much known during compile time. Then the compiler will decide with respect to the code segment and data segment or things like that, where in the memory it will actually decide the activation record storage. Once the decision is made, the address of each activation record is fixed. And since the address of the activation record is fixed, anything which is stored inside that procedure is also fixed. So what it means is that at compile time, we can therefore fill in the addresses at which the target code can find the data it operates on. So that means whatever you allocate in static variable, it can be used as it is. So basically, even the addresses of procedures are known at compile time. Okay. Now, can you tell me a type of programming structure where this kind of prior information about the address, starting address of a procedure call is going to be detrimental, is going to be a catastrophe? Can you tell me one particular programming structure? So that structure is not supported in static allocation. So you say that I have a procedure P, the address of which is 100. And as I say that is problem in certain scenarios, which cannot be supported here. Can you tell me one such incident? Suppose I have a program. Okay, let me bring my window, open board. Okay. As you can see, I have a procedure P which is allocated at space 100. Okay. Now suppose this is a recursive call. So I call P with 10, and then this calls P with say 5. And in turn, this calls P with 2. So something like divide and conquer programs. So can you tell me in such a scenario, what is the problem if we have a static allocation for P? Static activation record allocation for P. Can you tell me? Yes? Any of you can be? So this is a recursive call. So what will happen in such a case? So P is called with parameter 10. In turn, P is calling itself with parameter 5, and then it is calling again with 2. What will happen if we have a static allocation mechanism for activation records? what problem would we encounter? Think about it a little bit. Okay. And these are the limitations which I'll come back just in a minute. So here you can see there are two procedures, consume and produce. So the code area is given clearly. Then we have static area. Part of it is used for activation record for consumer and part of it is for producer. So here you can see that the procedures consume and produce are statically allocated. Okay. Now we go to the stack allocation. It is based on the idea of a control stack. Activation records are pushed and popped as activations begin and end. So, which is what we generally understand about C language, for example. So, storage for locals is contained in the activation record. Locals are bound to fresh storage in each activation because a new activation record is pushed onto the stack when a call is made. The values of locals are deleted when the activation ends. The values are lost because the storage for locals disappear when the activation record is popped. And I think you have seen some problems during your C course where we exploited this kind of a scenario. Like, for example, returning the pointer to an automatically allocated variable. Now, this is how activation records are grown. So here you have main. From main, we are calling queue with the parameter 1, 9, which is the quicksort thing. So as you can see, okay, sorry, first main is called, which is the northwest figure. Then northeast figure is when main calls R, which is basically the read array. And you can see I is an integer which is allocated inside the procedure context for R on the activation record. Then R is returned and we get Q with parameters 1, 9. So we have integers m, n as the formal argument. And then we have integers as I, which is declared locally. And then, as you can see, Q calls itself and it creates a copy of a similar copy of Q. So you can see that on the stack segment, two copies of Q exist with different parameter values. And that is a necessary thing for recursion. This is what is not going to happen if you have a static allocation, because here you can see in the whiteboard. So if P calls with 10, then the address is 100. And now P10 calls P5. So the same procedure is called at exactly the same address, 100, again. So now P5 has no idea to know where to return control to when it exits and returns the control back to P10. Okay, so P10 and P5 are actually, even though they are the same function or same procedure, they are different as far as the activation is concerned. So their storage should be distinct. This is not possible in case of a static allocation. Okay, so static allocation cannot handle real recursion, although limited recursion can be handled. Like, for example, it can handle one level of nesting, for example, but not more than that, unless there is some more support is given. Then, as you can see, Q is calling Q19 is calling Q1, 3, Q1, 3 is calling Q1, 0, and all these things are happening. The dashed lines are showing those activations which are stale, which have already been exited. So Q19 called P19 first, then it called Q1, 3, then Q1, 3 called P1, 3, which it exited, then it called Q1, 0, which is also exited. So now two copies of Q are there, one with the parameter 1, 9, another is the parameter with 1, 3. So if you want real recursion support in your program, in your programming language, you have to use at least, you cannot use the static activation record allocation type. So values communicated between caller and callee are generally placed at the beginning of the callee's activation record. Okay, so caller is calling and those values are placed at the beginning of the procedure which is called. Fixed length items are generally placed at the middle. Items whose size may not be known are placed at the end. And top of the stack pointer needs to be judiciously placed because that is going to play a key role when the function terminates and the control is returned to the caller function. So function control basically return activation control returns from the called function to the caller function. A common approach is to have it point to the end of the fixed length fields. So these are some of the conventions. This is something we have already seen, very similar. Now, some issues. How do we access non-local variables without nested procedures? Non-local variables in C, it does not have nested procedures, but it can have nesting of blocks. Okay. So it's not that C does not have any need for access of non-local variables. It can do it for scopes. I think all of you know what is a scope. So a scope is shown like this. So this is a scope, and here you can actually have another scope. So this is a separate scope. So if you declare any variable here, say here you can declare int A, and here you can declare int B. So they actually can access each other via the scoping operators. So this is possible in some of the more recent standards of C. So what is the solution? The solution is that all data declared outside procedures are static. We all know that. Other names must be at the activation record at the top of the stack, can be accessed from stack pointer. So you can treat a block as a parameterless procedure and allocate space for all blocks in a procedure. Okay. So that is one way you can. So this means that this is treated as a procedure, this is treated as another procedure, but then it is in the context of another final procedure which is defined as a function or something like that, int something. So all these int A, B are declared within this function context so that each block can actually access non-local items. That's what it means. Non-local variables in Pascal, where you have procedures which are nested. Now, what do we mean by nested procedures? I can show you one example which I've already shown here. I don't know how many of you know Pascal, but that was a language which we had to learn when we did our graduation. So we know quite well how we can actually have a nested procedure call. Like for example, here you can see that. Oh, there is no nesting here actually. I'm sorry. Yeah, there is no nesting here. Let me see if there is an example. Here is a Pascal program. So here you can see there is a program called short, which is the main program you can say. And inside there are some procedures, read array, exchange, quicksort. But you can see one interesting thing. Inside the procedure quicksort between line 11 and line 19, okay, you can see that something strange is there. Between line 13 and line 18, a function is declared within the context of the procedure quicksort. This is the example of nested procedures in Pascal. Okay. Function and procedure are same in Pascal. Apart from that, procedure doesn't return any value and function has to return some value. So you can see that partition is a nested function inside the procedure quicksort. This is possible in Pascal. You cannot do that in C. So in C, you cannot say function, say int quicksort or void quicksort, and then suddenly inside that function body, you write int partition. This is not possible. This is not possible, like here. So you cannot say void QS, and then you write something, and then here you do this int partition. You then write the function body. You cannot do this in C. But it is possible to do so in Pascal, and to some extent it is possible to do in Java also, which is known as the inner class concept. So something similar, although it's not related to function, but you can create a nested object in Java. Now look at the calling sequence. This is very interesting. So S calls Q. S is the sort program. It has some variables A and X, as you can see here in line number 2 and 3. Two variables A and X are declared in sort. So sort has two variables A and X. Then it calls Q with the parameter 1, 9. And as you can see in quicksort, okay, inside Q, there are two variables on line number 12, which are K and V. So Q is called with 1, 9, and K and V are the two variables. As you can see, the access link field has an important property here, or important role here to play. So let us look into the access link thing again. We have already discussed it, but we didn't understand the true implication. So this is a very important part of the activation record. So here is the architecture. As you can see, actual parameters, then returned values, then we have control link, and then we have access link. So what is access link? As you can see here, access link is an optional field used to refer to non-local data held in other activation records. So that means here there is an access link from Q1, 9 to refer to S. So if it wants to access non-local data, it can do that through this access link. Now after that, Q1, 9 calls Q1, 3. As you can see, Q1, comma 3 does not refer to Q1, comma 9 from its access link. Why? Because they are basically copies of the same function. Okay, so any non-local variable it wants to access has to point to the caller which is not itself. Like in a recursive procedure, Q1, comma 9 or Q1, comma 3, basically they are not they are local to each other. It's not that variables are non-local to each other, but anything which is declared within the context of S and outside Q is certainly non-local for Q1, comma 9 and Q1, comma 3 as well. This is the intent, okay, of having the access link. So you can see both Q1, comma 9 and Q1, comma 3 with their access links are pointing to S. Now Q1, comma 3 calls P1, comma 3. Note that now P1, comma 3 points his access link to Q1, comma 3 because that is non-local to P. Now that means if P wants to access something from S, a non-local variable from S, context of S, it has to traverse the series of access link from itself till it reaches the final destination. So P1, comma 3 has to point its access link to Q1, comma 3 that it has to traverse. Then from the access link of Q1, comma 3, it has to traverse to S to find a non-local item. Because a non-local item for P could be in Q or could be in S. So if this is a series of nested function calls, and then in that case, you need to traverse a series of such chains to get to the final destination where the non-local variable you are targeting is declared locally. As you can see, after that partition call, you can see after the partition call, it is calling exchange. Inside function partition, it is calling exchange. But note that E is not really referring to P or Q. It is referring to S. Why? Because as you can see, procedure exchange, the only non-local variable it can handle is actually declared within the context S. It cannot refer to a non-local variable which is declared within the quicksort context, because these two are at the same level. I mean, they cannot access each other anyway. But exchange certainly should be able to access X under which it is declared. So this is the intent of having these things. For example, in procedure Q, you can see two variables K and V are declared as integer. Inside partition function, K and V should be available to partition itself. Okay, that is the concept of non-local variable access, which is possible in Pascal. Of course, quicksort cannot access a variable which is declared within exchange, and the reverse way. Exchange cannot access which is declared within quicksort. But certainly, quicksort can access variable which is declared under sort, or partition can access a non-local variable which is declared within the context of quicksort. So this is what it means from this diagram. So these access links enable us elegantly to handle the non-local variable access. As you can see from E, we are neither pointing to P or Q, but pointing to S. So if you use access link, you can understand to find out the context of a non-local variable, you have to traverse a series of change. So if you have a very deep nested function call, you need to access them, and this is a sequential access. So you know that it takes a lot of time, order of n. So what is the faster method? The faster method is known as display. Now let us explain the concept with a figure, with a diagram, and then it will be easier. As you can see here, when S is called, so display is basically an array of pointers, you can say. So D1, D2, D3, like that, it grows. How does it grow? I'll explain. So first, D1 points to S, which is the top level function, which is the starting function, you can say the main function for sort. Okay, so D1 points to the context of S. A context means activation record context. Okay, then S calls Q1 comma 9. So you can see that a new entry is created in the display array at the second index, so D2. This pointer is pointing to Q1 comma 9. And note that the context is saved also. This display context is saved inside the activation record context of Q1 comma 9. Now Q1 comma 9 calls Q1 comma 3. What happens? Now what happens is this new activation context for Q1 comma 3 is what is pointed by D2. So D2 now points to the new activation context of Q, because Q1 comma 9 and Q1 comma 3 are in effect the same activation context. Only thing is that they are different in their parameters. Okay, and just to facilitate the navigation between these recursive procedure calls, different invocation of the same recursive procedure call, you can see that there is a link between the saved D2 of Q1 comma 3 and that of Q1 comma 9. But you can see that a new entry is not created in the display array. So we don't have a D3 yet, because these Q1 comma 9 and Q1 comma 3 are essentially at the same level of nesting as far as the program structure is concerned. Now Q calls P with the parameter 1 comma 3. Now we have a different function context or procedure context. So the display increases by another level, and which is D3, as you can see, pointing to P1 comma 3. And now there is a saved D3 address as well. Now what happens when E is called from P? Again, P and E are at the same level of nesting depth. So D3 does not increase anymore. D3 now points to E, but then there is no pointer between E and P, because they cannot access the non-local variable of each other. E is within, let me go back to the procedure call again. So as you can see, exchange is outside the context of quicksort. So exchange and partition cannot access each other's local variable anyway. So, but they are at the same level. They are just below Q, just like Q and P is below S, Q is below S, E is also below S. But Q and E, they are below S, but P is below Q. So that's why the nesting depths are like that. So here what happens is D3 points to E, and now E points to Q, because that is where it was called from. Q calls P, and in turn E is called, but P cannot call really E. Okay, let me go back to the program again. So as you can see, inside the program, Q is calling P, because you know that quicksort calls the partition procedure, and then the partition procedure is calling exchange. Okay, here what is happening is partition is calling exchange, but in order to find the non-local variable for the context E cannot go to P, because E cannot access any of the local variables of P anyway from the program structure itself. But E can access non-local variables which are declared within the context of Q. So the pointer is now pointing to Q1 comma 3, and then as you can see, D3 is pointing to, D2 is pointing to E3, and D3 is still pointing to P. So P is at a deeper level of nesting, and E is at the same level as Q, as you can see. So just like Q1, 9 calling Q1, 3, and then an exchange is called, exchange is definitely under Q, but then as far as the non-local variables are concerned, exchange is just below Q, and if E is known or exchange is known, non-local variables for E can be accessed by navigating from E to Q. And already the D3 is created. So here you can see that for E to access a non-local variable, it can just travel only one level. Okay. Whereas as you can see in the other diagram, which was solely via the access links, as you can see, more travel was necessary. Like P had to travel to Q and Q had to travel to S, like this. And here that is not required. If you know that context is S, it is just D1. If you want to access something from Q or P, it has to be D2, and if it is from P, it has to be D3. So that way, the number of accesses are very less. If you have more and more nesting, this display becomes very important. So let us go back to the description of display. Using an array of pointer to activation records is what is known as display. Referencing non-local variables always requires only 2 memory references. So it is constant, unlike order of n in case of access links without display. So control is in a procedure P at nesting depth J, then the first J minus elements of the display point to the most detailed activation of the procedures that lexically enclose procedure P, and DJ points to the activation of P. That's what we have seen. Like in this case, for P, D2, D3 points to P, and D0 and D1, D1 and D2 point to procedures which lexically nest P, which are nothing but S for D1 and Q and P for D2. So if even from P you want to, it wants to access anything from any of the other contexts which are lexically nesting P, it has to do directly go to the array element. Like if P is declared at D3, it needs to access D2 first, and from there it needs to go to the actual procedure which defines the variable name, declares the variable name. Okay. And this is a rule for creating the new activation record. Okay, heap allocation. This is an entirely different thing compared to stack allocation. Heap is used for allocating space for objects created at runtime. So nodes of dynamic data structures such as linked list, trees, etc., malloc, free, etc. So assumption of stacks is once a function returns, the activation record cannot be referenced again. So we cannot store old values in the activation tree. So every activation record has either finished execution or is an ancestor to the current activation record. That is the idea with stack activation. Unfortunately, with heap, this kind of assumption is not possible. So there are some breaking assumptions. First breaking assumption is once a function returns, its activation record cannot be referenced again. This assumption is broken in heaps, and we will see one example known as closures. I have given some assignment on closures in projects for certain groups. A closure is the combination of a function bundled together with references to its surrounding state or the lexical environment. This is an example. So create counter. So as you can see, create counter is a function which returns a function. So as you can see, inside function create counter, we have a return statement, which is a function itself. That function returns a counter, an integer variable. And when create counter is called within some other function, like you can see my function is calling create counter, it is returning a function, and then it can use that function as an argument to different method calls or something like that. Like you can see print f colon, f parenthesis. That means it's basically going to call the create counter. It will go to the create counter context and get a new invocation of the function which is inside it, the unnamed function there. So that means different invocation calls should increase the value of counter and print it like this. As you can see here, my function is calling first time the create counter, and inside the counter is increased to 1, so you get the output 1. Next time it is calling create counter again, and then so you can see first time f is referring to the left instance of fn, second time it is referring to the right context of fn, but each time the counter value is increased by 1, and you can see 1 and 2 are printed successively. This is the concept of closures. So a closure gives you access to an outer function scope from an inner function. This is possible in JavaScript, for example. Where you can create a function. So you can use closure by defining a function inside another function and expose it. To expose a function, return it or pass it to another function. The inner function will have access to the variables in the outer function scope even after the outer function has returned. Like in this particular case, f is returned by create counter, but then f is a function itself which can access counter. So even though create counter has exited, the inner function context of create counter, which is increasing counter variable, is still active. So you can increase it. And this is not possible in a stack oriented activation record structure. It is possible in a heap oriented activation record structure. Second breaking assumption is every activation record has either finished executing or is an ancestor of the current activation record. This is also violated in a different idea known as coroutines. I have given some assumptions on that. Assignments on that. What is that? So you are defining a function down from with a parameter n. I don't know what is yield n mean actually. Forgot. Okay. But somehow I can understand that it is decrementing the value of n. So you declare another function, you define another function myfunc, where from I in down from with parameter 3 print I. I don't even know what is the output. Okay, I haven't. Maybe I'll find out. Is it what kind of language is this? Can anybody tell me? Is this Python by any chance? Anybody can tell me?
Yes, sir. I think so.
So what will be the output? You think? I think you can run it. Why don't you try running it on Python consoles, or if you have any Python compiler of your own?
Sir, at line number 9, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah. This is the thing, right?
Yes, sir.
Doing anything? I don't know. Okay, let me check it. Okay, while n greater than 0.
Sir, what is yield in?
I don't know. Okay, let me comment it. Some function, I think so. Inconsistent. So it should be here.
Sir, line number 7 should have a tab.
It should have a tab, right? Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Inconsistent use of tabs, it's saying.
So down from is not returning anything.
So should I say return n? That would be fine, right?
Sir, yield n is perfect.
It perfect.
It will return the value of
N.
n.
Okay. Then it
So the
is saying,
problem is in some places there are spaces, some places there are tabs.
oh, okay, right.
It has to be all spaces or all tabs.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that is the thing, I think. It's fine, I think. Yeah. This is where there was a problem. Okay. Okay. I think minus, this symbol is not minus, it's something else. Yeah, this is the one. I'll probably try it out a little later. Let's see. I'll give you the output. Something is wrong with my copying. So anyway, so this is an example, but we get the concept from here that um, we are calling down from my func, and n should be available. That's what it means. Okay. So this is what it means. So if we go back to our earlier assumption that it's actually not neither an ancestor nor it has executed from its activation. So in this particular program, down from is, how do you define down from? Is it exited from its context? No. So my func and down from, they are not really ancestor to each other, but they are working concurrently. In fact, this concurrency is what created this concept of coroutines. Okay. So they are working concurrently to produce something needed for the programming purpose. So this is where you cannot use a stack-based context, activation record context. So the stack allocation strategy cannot be used if either of the following is possible. The values of local names must be retained when an activation ends. Like in the first example, we have seen the counter, or in the second example where we are talking about n, a called activation outlives the caller. Like for example, my func is called, my func is the caller and down from is the called function, but then down from can actually keep running even after my func has returned from the context. Okay. So this possibility cannot occur for those languages where activation trees correctly depict the flow of control between procedures. So we are not really talking about an activation tree here, but something else. So in each of the above cases, what happens? The deallocation of activated records need not occur in a last in, first out fashion. As I said in the beginning of this discussion, that in general, in C-like language where we are more familiar with, the activation is like this, that A calls B, B calls C, then activation for C ends first, then activation for B ends, and then activation for A ends. So this calls for a LIFO architecture or LIFO structure, data structure. But in coroutines case, it is not that thing. Okay. So heap allocation is basically the needed one. It parcels out pieces of contiguous storage as needed for activation records or other objects. Pieces may be deallocated in array order. So, as you know, the fragmentation, when you studied fragmentation problems, basically a heap can consist of alternate areas that are free and in use. And it is quite possible that there is insufficient memory in between, which you can allocate for something where it cannot fit in. So you may run into the problem of fragmentation. So sometimes deep fragmentation procedure has to be there to make it more efficient. So an example of heap activation, let us go into the diagram first. As you can see, S calls R, R calls Q, but the activation for R is retained when Q is called. So that means R is terminated, but its activation is retained. So the record for the new activation Q cannot physically follow Q, but it has to follow after R. Now, if the retained activation record for R is deallocated, there would be free space. And as I said, heap manager has to somehow make use of it by some means. Last topic I want to work on today is what do we mean by scopes? Static scopes, dynamic scopes, we are accustomed to hearing this. Let us see this more formally. So static scope is a global identifier which refers to the identifier with that name that is declared in the closest enclosing scope of the program text. So there is unchanging or static relationship between blocks in the program text. So again, let us read it again. A global identifier refers to the identifier with that name that is declared in the closest enclosing scope of the program text. Okay, let's see if I have an example. Okay, like for example, int x equal to 1. It is the outer block. Then we have a function g with a parameter z, which is nothing but x plus z. So this kind of syntax is possible in many languages, where you declare a function and you basically assign some value on the right hand side of that function, and that value is returned by the function. Then there is another function declared fy. Here we have another x int declared locally within fy, which is x equal to y plus 1. And then you return g y star x. What does it mean? That y into x is done. So inside f, the value of x becomes y plus 1, and then y into y plus 1, that value is given to the function g as a parameter, and it increases x by that amount. So it is basically x plus y into y minus 1. That is the formula, and it calls f with 3. So first look at static scoping. What happens with static scoping? In static scoping, what happens is f is called with 3, so y gets the value 3, as you can see here. Then x becomes y plus 1, so x becomes 4. Then g is called with y star x. So y is defined as the parameter, y is declared as the parameter to f, so it gets the value 3. X is basically the local value of function f, and it is basically the value 4. So so when you call g, you are basically passing y with the value 3 and x with the value 4. Okay, now what happens when it goes inside g with the parameter z? So in the parameter z, it is just increasing z by x plus z. Now what is that x? In static scoping, the rule is that the nearest enclosing x is the one whose value is given. Okay. Okay. So that means when you call g with the value y star x, which is nothing but 12, and you add x onto 12. So what is the value of x? The value of x is 1 via the rule of static scoping. So you get the return value 13. So in case of static scoping, f3 will return the value 13. Okay, as you can see, fy is the function and the value g y star x is returned. So g y star x is evaluating to 13 here, and that value is returned. But this is not the case when you have a dynamic scope. Dynamic scope, a global identifier, refers to the identifier associated with the most recent activation record. So it uses the actual sequence of calls that are executed in the dynamic execution of the program. So that means if you look at the stack, basically you need a stack. So in the stack, what happens is you have a stack like this. So here you are having first x equal to 1. Then f is called. This is the function context for f with the parameter 3. here you can see that f is called with the value 3. So this is the context for f. This is the context for f. Inside the context for f, we are having another x which is declared within the function of f, and this is nothing but y plus y, so we get the value 4. Okay. Now, then the next function is called, which is g. This is the context for g. It is called with x star y. X is having the value 4, y is having the value 3. So g is called with the value 12. And inside g, we need x and we need z. So z is actually 12. That is the parameter. Now, question is, what is x? This is the question. What is x? Now, if you look at the static context, here this x is referring to this x, which is 1. So in this case, this is 1. And x plus z is x plus z is 1 plus 12 is returning the value 13. This is for static scope. Now let us look into the concept of dynamic scope. So up to this much, there is no problem. Z is called with the value, Z has the value 12 in G12. The question is with X. What is X? X is how much? Now, as I said, the rule says it is not the static or unchanging relationship between this X and this function. Okay. This is the static relationship that for the function gz, the nearest x is basically this guy, which is 1. But as I said, in case of dynamic scoping, this is no longer true. In dynamic scoping, the rule says that actual sequence of calls that are executed in the dynamic execution of the program. A global identifier refers to the identifier associated with the most recent activation record. So if we go by the definition, for X, what is the recent mode activation value? What is the recent mode activation value? This is this guy. The value is 4. So 12 plus 4, it becomes 16. So as you can see, just by a different interpretation of X, depending on the static scope and dynamic scope, we are getting two different values for G. This is another example. So float R equal to 0.25, void show printf R, void small, float R equal to 0.125, and then show. So in main, show small printf, and then again show small printf. So in the first case, suppose it is a static scope. So show, when you call show, it will print 0.25. Now you call small. Inside small, you give the value 1.125, and then you call show. So you call show, and via the static scoping, the nearest R is basically 0.25. So it will still print 0.25. Okay. So in case of static scoping, you will always see 0.25. In case of dynamic scoping, what happens? First show gives you value 0.25, but when it is called from within small, it is basically getting the dynamic scope where it belongs to, or where it is called it is called within small now, so it gets the value 0.125, as you can see. So under dynamic scoping, the value is changed. I think all of you understood this point. Now, implementing this kind of a scoping mechanism is not so easy, as you can see. Static scoping is easy because you just need to look into the context which is nearest to it. In case of dynamic scope, that doesn't work. So you have to look for the activation. So search activation records on the stack to find the first activation record containing the non-local name. The depth of search depends on the input to the program and cannot be determined at compile time. So some information is needed on the identifiers to be maintained at runtime within the activation records. Takes longer time to access globals. Whereas, so this is one type of method. This is known as deep access method. So you basically search the activation record on the stack, keep on searching till you find the activation record where the non-local name is. So you might have to search deep inside the stack. Whereas in case of shallow access method, allocate some static storage for each name. When a new activation record is created for a procedure P, a local name in P takes over the static storage allocated to name N. So that means if I go to a diagram again, so suppose this is deep access method. In case of deep access method, let us look into the program again. So here, so this is our deep access method example. So we have the same example. In case of deep access, what happens? Let us look into the stack context. So first, we have show. We have show, and then we have small. Okay, this is gone. After that, this is gone. So now, so okay. So when we have first context, then we call show. Okay, and inside show, we want to print R. So this is basically the main program. So this is global, you can say global. Global is actually not declared here. So let us write a different one. So this is the data area. And here you are declaring R. Which is 0.25. Okay. Now, when you are calling show is, okay, in case of dynamic scoping, so show is trying to find out which R it belongs to. So first call, this is the call, this call. So it says that, okay, I don't have any R on the activation record. I don't have a local R. I don't have any function which is on top of which is on top of me. So I'll search the global and I'll find out R, which is 0.25. So first it prints 0.25. Now next time small is called. So show is gone. So now we have the context for small, and then small calls show, and in small there is a variable which is r, which is, as you know, 0.125. So when inside show it calls printing for r, it will look for the context, nearest context on the activation record structure. So as you can see, it will start searching. It will first go to SM and it finds, okay, 0.125 is here. Okay. Then I'll print 0.125. Suppose there was another function, say, I don't know, show called something like, say, I don't know, lookup or something like that, LU. So in that case, LU will search for SH via the access link. Then from SH, it will go to SM and find R. And if it still doesn't find R, then it will go to the global area. This is the deep access method. This is known as deep access method. Okay. In case, so you can see it has to search a lot of depth. In case of shallow access, it doesn't have to do that. It has a local area. So the global area, the R stays like this. There is a local R in SM, but when SH is called, SH also gets that local variable. So it will also have a 0.125. Because this is the context of SM. Now suppose we have a different invocation. So all these things are gone and we have a new invocation which needs to access R again. Then R can go to the global directly. It is 0.25. So if R is within the context of a particular function, then that value is copied. If there is nothing like that, the global variable is copied. That is the intent of shallow access. So in shallow access, some static storage for each name is allocated. So for any variable, there is nothing created on the stack, but there is something created on the stack as well, but there is some static storage also created. So when a new activation record is created, a local name takes over the static storage, but previous value of n, which is held in the static storage, is saved in the activation record as well. Now, the moment this activation record is restored, the global storage value is restored from the value which is stored on the stack. So that means you can directly use global. You just have to access one level. Either it is local, or if it is not local, then the static value is available. So for accessing global variables, you don't have to access the so many access link. You can directly get it from the static storage area. So what I'm saying here, what I want to mean here is basically here, this R is not stored at all. So here, even in the global static area, 0.125 is stored. And the old value of 0.25 is pushed onto the stack. Now suppose SM returns and say another function X comes, this 0.25 goes back here and overrides the one which was allocated on the fly on the stack. So this is now going to be 0.25. I hope you understood it. So that means the static area always holds the value till a function is called which has a variable of the same name as the static variable name, In that case, the static area is overwritten, and the saved value in the static area is copied onto the stack. That's the only difference. So that means global variables can be accessed very fast, but for each activation, for all the local variables having the same name as the global variable, need to be first pushed onto the stack, and new values need to be written into the global area. And when activation ends, those global area values need to be restored from the stack. So some overhead for each activation. That's what is meant here. So direct and quick access to globals, but some overhead is incurred when activation begins and ends. Whereas in case of the deep access method, accessing global takes a lot of time, because you have to access each and every record in the activation sequence sequentially. But for each activation to start and end, no overhead is needed. So these two methods implement the dynamic scoping, which I have already mentioned, deep access and shallow access. These are some interesting references you can see from the various websites. Both all are very interesting, go into much more detail than we actually went into. In fact, this runtime environment is something which, even though we don't really pay a lot of attention to compared to parsers and intermediate codes and stuff like that, but as you can see, it's really a very important thing when it comes to the efficiency of the program. Okay, please don't leave, because I haven't yet completed. I haven't took your attendance till now, so please don't leave. So in that case, so if you are interested in implementing your programming language efficiently with minimum overhead and inefficiency, you probably have to look into these things a lot more. And as I said, some of the storage capability or lack of it has some fundamental impact on the design of the language. Like, for example, with static allocation, you cannot really have recursion at deep levels. So recursive procedures which require a lot of nesting cannot be done. You cannot have nested functions or procedure calls. Scoping is a very important thing. Also, if you need to outlive your procedure even after the activation of the caller is ends, all those issues you need to think carefully before you design your language and decide on the features you are planning to give. As you have seen, like C and C++, we actually keep the addresses like pointers, which is essentially a hook into the physical memory, or virtual memory, so you can easily garble it. Is it a good feature to have? A lot of people don't like it, and those who know C# language a little bit know that they have the safety feature. You can override the safety feature to implement pointers, but in general, C# doesn't allow pointers to be directly accessible to programmers. Java certainly doesn't allow, even though it uses references and pointers randomly, but it doesn't give direct access to memory. So those who are a little malicious programmer, many of you might have tested with garbling the pointed value. Like, you did a mem copy or mem set onto the pointer thing, and it actually did produce a lot of catastrophic effect. You can overlay the image of a program and things like that, which are bad things. In fact, this is how most of the fundamental security attacks started. Java is more secure that way. In fact, you read about that 10-15 features of Java, and one of them is secured and safe and secure, is because of this. Okay, because it doesn't allow programmers to access pointers directly, even though it is based on references and things like that. So this is where storage mechanism actually impacts the